Hi, thanks for downloading The Inquiry from the BBC World Service. We're a weekly program. Our job is to add in-depth analysis to one question from the news. We hope you like it.
BBC World Service. This is Jo Fidgen with The Inquiry. This week, who wants what in Libya?
I said this is a process. This is going to take time. We are not expecting to have a breakthrough tomorrow or day after tomorrow.
Pity this man, Bernardino Leon, a Spanish diplomat charged with what must be one of the most exasperating jobs in the world, trying to make peace in Libya, a country so badly damaged that it has two rival governments, countless militias, and now Islamic State.
In one of the deadliest attacks in Libya since the toppling of the former leader, Muammar Gaddafi, at least 40 people have been killed in a wave of car bomb attacks. Militants loyal to Islamic State have said they were...
The Arab Spring of 2011 and NATO airstrikes had deposed Libya's dictator, Colonel Gaddafi, after 42 years of despotic rule. There was a brief flowering of hope. But the season was short. When Gaddafi's tent was blown away, it exposed tribal, regional and ideological divisions which have splintered into a civil war, driving hundreds of thousands of people from their homes and plugging the flow of oil on which the country depends. The United Nations has made several abortive attempts at peace talks and has been trying again this week. So we're asking, who wants what in Libya?
Part 1. The House of Representatives.
Our first expert witness is Mattia Toaldo, who works at the European Council on Foreign Relations, specialising in Libya.
I started in 2004 for two reasons. Basically, one was that I'm Italian and we did a lot of bad things in Libya, so I wanted to know more of what we did. I think it's part of one's education to learn the bad things that one's country has done. The second reason was no one was actually dealing with this country. In 2004, it was a very mysterious country with an apparently mad dictator putting bombs on planes and supporting terrorists worldwide, writing weird books with very weird theories and very crazy interpretations of the Quran.
And now everyone wants to know about Libya.
Indeed. And it's for a sad reason, and it's a shame, given how beautiful country that is.
We're starting our inquiry not in the capital, Tripoli, as you might expect, but in a remote port on the other side of the country, Tobruk, formerly an Italian military post. A concrete hotel, very 1970s, serves as the base of the House of Representatives, recognised by the United Nations, which supervised its election.
The elections were held on the 25th of June of last year. Not very high turnout because of the violence which had already started, but still it's the parliament in Libya.
It's an eclectic bunch, including many who once worked for the state under Colonel Gaddafi.
It would be unrealistic to think that someone living in Libya, in a country where 80% of the workforce works for the government, did not work for the government for 42 years.
Mattia's point is that having worked for the Gaddafi regime doesn't necessarily make you a fan.
The problem with the government in Tobruk is that it's just a steering wheel, but then the car is 800, 1,000 kilometers away from the steering wheel.
The car is in Tripoli, home to the civil service and the central bank and the organisation that controls oil production. But the Tobruk government can't steer it because Tripoli is in the hands of its rivals, who say they are the legitimate government. More on them later.
So in terms of people's perception of who is the government, this is very blurred at the moment. In terms of who provides the daily services, this is unclear to many Libyans. In most cases, it's the municipality, the local council, which actually runs services.
So what is actually being run from Tobruk then?
Laws are passed in Tobruk, but yes, any law that implies a civil service structure to be implemented cannot be implemented by the Tobruk government. That's why I think that the metaphor of a steering wheel very far away from the car works.
If they had the car, if they had money and power, what would the Tobruk government do with it?
I think at the moment it's hard to say what kind of country they want, because they simply did not have time to think about what country they want, because the House of Representatives started to meet in Tobruk when hostilities had already started. So they started meeting while they were fighting. They never had time to think about the far future.
So what do they want right now?
For the immediate future, they want Libya to be clear of any Islamists and clear of any terrorist groups.
The man who might achieve that is General Khalifa Haftar. Remember him? He's going to be cropping up again. It's been said that he looks like a retired schoolteacher with his silver hair and black moustache. Now in his 70s, he's worked with and against Gaddafi in his time.
He fought in the war in Chad in the 1980s and lost the war. Then he defected from the regime, went to live in the US, weirdly lived in Langley, Virginia, which is the place where the CIA is located.
Did he have connections to the CIA?
We don't know, but it's weird that in a country that vast, he decided to live in Langley. Then he came back to Libya in 2011 to fight against Gaddafi. He is considered to be quite a divisive figure, even within the Tobruk camp. Not everyone likes him, but he's been recently appointed as head of the armed forces.
So what does General Haftar want?
His first goal is to fight terrorists. This is what he says. And he thinks he's fighting terrorists also on behalf of the West. And this is what he says in all the interviews. Then what else he wants to do, it's not clear.
But many suspect he has political ambitions.
Haftar was accused of organizing a coup d'etat on Valentine's Day in 2014, except there is no real Libyan army to do a coup d'etat, and there is no real state to control. So it's a coup d'etat without the etat.
Between General Haftar and the House of Representatives, who's actually calling the shots in Tobruk?
At the moment, because they lack access to the money, and they have some access to weapons, those who hold weapons hold more power. So people like Haftar hold more power. Basically, since the overthrow of Gaddafi in 2011, Libya has never really experienced a period of peace. It was not that militias were integrated into the state. It was the state which had been integrated into the militias.
So, in Tobruk, we have an internationally recognised government and a forceful general. They want to unseat the alternative government in Tripoli. But who are they? A word of warning, it's about to get seriously complicated.
Part 2. The Other Guys.
So who is running the show? The political types or the military types, or neither, or both?
I would say neither, because it's so fragmented, but the military actors are the ones who are really influential on the ground, and they're the ones who need to be paid attention to.
This is Abdul Rahman Al-Ajali, who moved to the UK as a small boy.
I was raised in a Libyan household. We spoke Arabic at home. You know, we'd go to Libya every year. We were very close with our family back home. Some of our relatives live in the UK, and we always embraced our culture and embraced our language and embraced our heritage.
And when the uprising happened in 2011, you went back to Libya to fight against Gaddafi?
Yeah.
And ended up working for the Prime Minister?
Yeah.
Abdul left Libya last year.
It's just that I'd rather not work for the government when there's two of them. I don't want to be part of this current political dispute or the current issues. I don't see it as rational in any way, shape or form. I see it as completely emotional and illogical and destructive to all actors. So I didn't really want to be a part of it, to be honest.
If anyone's going to know who's in charge in Tripoli, it's Abdul. So who are they?
The people who are running Tripoli. It's a very good question. There's no simple answer, I'm afraid.
Brace yourselves.
There is an Islamist versus non-Islamist agenda. You have the ISIS issue, the Al-Qaeda issue, the Muslim Brotherhood issue. You have moderate Islamists, hardliners. You have a revolutionary versus counter-revolutionary narrative. And you have also a very interesting social dynamic, which is non-Bedouin Arab versus Bedouin Arab historical alliances.
OK, here are the basics. In the first election post-Gaddafi, an Islamist party did well and had a lot of influence on the coalition. Its main agenda was to exclude from power anyone who had worked for the Gaddafi regime. But it soon lost support and was heavily defeated when the House of Representatives was elected last year. That's the lot we heard about before. The ones who'd been voted out disputed the legitimacy of the election and didn't step aside. There was just too much to lose.
Each side fears that their opponent will exclude them if they were to take power.
Military support for the Tripoli government comes from Libya Dawn.
It can be basically described as a loosely organised and fragmented amalgamation of several revolutionary brigades, mainly from the town of Misrata, in a fragile alliance of convenience with certain Islamist factions, united against General Haftar's Operation Dignity in the east.
That's General Haftar from Part 1, the guy who looks a bit like a schoolteacher. And fear of him is pretty much the only thing that all the players in Tripoli can agree on. And what do they fear would happen if General Haftar had more power?
They fear a Egypt-type situation. They fear a military dictatorship.
And Tripoli is in General Haftar's sights. He considers them all Islamists, something he barely distinguishes from terrorists. And the Islamist label has stuck, to Abdul's annoyance.
It's not really accurate. When talking about the west of Libya and talking about Libya Dawn, it's not entirely accurate to describe them as an Islamist group or an alliance with an Islamist agenda. It's not accurate at all.
So the reports that we get from Tripoli of schools being segregated by sex, of beauty shops being closed down, of women being forced to wear a veil and so on, who is enforcing that?
Basically, what you have in Libya is a balance of power whereby the state no longer has monopoly over the use of force. So you can have groups in Tripoli that are going around schools and universities enforcing these types of things, and there won't be anybody who will take them to account.
So where are we? 2 power bases in Tripoli and Tobruk, made up of disparate groups, political and military, who are united only in their hatred of the other side and who want, above all, to destroy the other. For the last several months, their animosity has been dragging the country into civil war, and into the chaos has stepped Islamic State.
Part 3. The Threat in the Desert.
On February the 15th this year, Islamic State confirmed its arrival in Libya.
The 5-minute video shows hostages in orange jumpsuits being marched along a beach, each accompanied by a masked militant. The men are made to kneel before they are simultaneously beheaded.
21 men were murdered on that beach, all of them Coptic Christians from Egypt. Their killers belonged to Islamic State, which already controls parts of Syria and Iraq, and now they have a base in Derna, in eastern Libya.
It was always going to be a question of not if, but when Islamic State would emerge in Libya.
Our third expert witness is Mary Fitzgerald, an Irish journalist who's been reporting on Libya since the Arab Spring, interviewing many militants, their leaders and families. She spent the whole of last year in Tripoli.
I've seen not just the country divided, not just regions divided, not just communities divided, but I've seen families divided and social circles divided over the nature of the crisis, what caused the crisis, and how the crisis can be resolved. And I've seen brothers essentially coming to blows over this. And that's how bitter the situation in Libya has become now.
The Islamic State militants operating in Libya aren't foreign recruits by and large. They're Libyans coming home.
Since late 2011, hundreds of young Libyans have gone to join anti-regime forces in Syria. And many of those young Libyans ended up with Islamic State. There was actually a predominantly Libyan unit within Islamic State. And if you look at some of the Islamic State obituaries in recent months, whether in Syria or northern Iraq, many of them are actually Libyan. So what we saw happen last year was a number of the Libyans who had gone to Syria and Iraq and joined with Islamic State there started returning home. And this was happening around the same time that Islamic State sent some key figures, including key ideologues and planners, to Libya to assess Libya's potential.
And they found a land of opportunity.
You're talking about a country with porous borders, with vast ungoverned spaces, and of course right now with a political and security vacuum. And all of these factors make it very conducive indeed to Islamic State expansion to Libya.
IS claims to control 3 provinces in Libya, though Mary says they're exaggerating to attract foreign fighters and to peel local men away from other militant groups. You can see it happening with Ansar al-Sharia, one of Libya's best-known extremist organisations, listed as a terrorist group after the US ambassador to Libya was killed. It's taken a beating recently, and some of its members are defecting to Islamic State.
This is a large part of the radical landscape in Libya, this issue of what you could call brand rivalry.
Brand rivalry between militant groups. It's got as bad as that. Mary describes it as a youth subculture rooted in radicalism, one which Islamic State is exploiting with its social media strategy and gruesome videos, like the one released last month showing the murders of those Egyptian Christians.
What was quite striking was the references to Rome in that video. They were boasting about the fact that they carried out these killings south of Rome, as they put it. And then at the end of the video, the lead executioner basically vowed that they would conquer Rome.
So when they say we see this as a channel to Europe, do they mean sending fighters specifically onto European soil?
That appears to be what they are suggesting, yes. Remember that Libya is about 200 miles from Malta, an EU member state.
Islamic State on the prowl in Libya, and the only people there who can do something about it distracted by a civil war. The outside world is paying close attention, and some countries are up to their elbows trying to influence events. So what do they want?
Part 4. The Neighbours.
To what extent are other countries panicking about what's going on in Libya?
Well, I think many countries are panicking. My name is Isander El-Amrani. I'm the North Africa Project Director at International Crisis Group, which is a conflict prevention NGO.
Conflict prevention isn't at the top of everyone's list right now. After the Egyptians were killed on the beach, Cairo bombed Islamic State's base in Derna and has asked the UN to approve military intervention. Egypt and Libya share a long border. And bakers, it would seem.
At its height, over 1.5 million Egyptians worked and lived in Libya. If you go to some Libyan cities, most of the bakers, for instance, are Egyptian. So both countries are affected. But then it has a second set of interests, which are politically driven, which are informed by Egypt's domestic situation. Egypt currently supports the side, the Libyan government that is anti-Islamist, and projects onto Libya this Islamist versus secular divide that it sees in itself. But that's not the Libyan reality.
Egypt, then, is backing the internationally recognised government in Tobruk, as is the United Arab Emirates, which also fears the spread of Islamism.
On the other side, countries like Qatar and Turkey, which early in 2011 backed political Islam as the next major political force across the region. And these countries have lost their bet. They certainly have lost their bet in Egypt. They've lost that bet to some extent in Tunisia. And I think they're very afraid of losing the major advance that they had made in Libya, where the former parliament was not dominated, but certainly very influenced by political Islamists.
How are they showing their support?
Well, there's all sorts of allegations that Qatar is financing arms sales to the Tripoli side, that Turkey may have been involved in arms deliveries itself. Nothing official has been confirmed, but the allegations are out there.
Most countries haven't taken sides and are hoping the United Nations peace talks can deliver a unity government. Who's got a direct stake? First up, France.
France supports the negotiations process, but is very concerned about not what's happening in where most of the fighting is taking place, in the north of Libya, but in the south. Because in southern Libya, you've had all sorts of groups coming in from Mali and Niger, especially. So they're trying to make sure that these groups don't eventually return to northern Mali and undo the work that the French have done there.
How about Italy?
Well, Italy imports about 25% of its natural gas from western Libya. So it wants energy security.
And the Americans?
If you look at the United States, its dominant policy in the Middle East right now is about fighting the Islamic State. So all of these countries have had slightly different agendas after having, to be honest, allowed their Libya policy to drift for a number of years, for having really failed to think of what they would do next after the NATO intervention in 2011. They're beginning to converge on the need to get these negotiations working, because the alternative is really prolonged conflict, and it would be much, much more costly than working out a political deal now.
But as we've heard in this inquiry, getting an agreement is very far from simple.
Even the location of the negotiations has been a subject for the negotiation.
Here's our first expert witness again, Mattia Tualdo. He calls it negotiations tourism.
They were in Morocco last week, they will be in Algeria this week, and after that, part of them will move to Geneva and part of that will move to Brussels.
He likens these talks to the Vietnamese peace process.
We know that the Vietnam War, in the negotiations to end it, one stumbling block at one point was the shape of the table around which they had to sit.
We asked the United Nations spokesperson about the table at these negotiations. "Oh, there's no table," he said. "We haven't got to that stage." The talks are still taking place in separate rooms. Back to our question, who wants what in Libya? We've heard that the internationally recognised government wants to oust the previous authorities. They, in turn, say they are the legitimate government and want to make sure they're not cut out of power. Pretty much the rest of the world wants them to form a unity government, not least because Islamic State is establishing a base in Libya and wants to move from there to Europe. What about ordinary Libyan citizens? What do they want? Journalist Mary Fitzgerald has been reporting from Libya since the Arab Spring and has been asking that question.
They are basically saying that they would prefer a strongman to rule Libya right now and to provide that security they so desperately crave.
A strongman who can provide security, who can keep such a divided country together. Does that ring any bells?
The inquiry is produced in London by Tim Mansell and Simon Mabin. All our previous programmes are available on the inquiry website. With fresh talks on Iran's nuclear programme, you might want to check out our inquiry. The US and Iran, how close could they get? And you can demand an inquiry. Get in touch through the World Service Facebook page or on Twitter @BBC The Inquiry.